Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello and welcome to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome a very special guest. She is a writer, an author, as well as a caregiver and Alzheimer's advocate, Miss Nancy Poland. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here with you today, Lance.
Absolutely. So Nancy, let's start with where it kind of all began for you and your journey here as a caregiver supporter, an author on books on dementia, and your volunteer work you do with educating through the Alzheimer's Association. When did this journey first begin for you?
So it started as my parents were aging, and my dad started showing signs, not even so much forgetfulness, although he would lose things, but, it turned out what's called his executive functioning was affected. So, trying to do money or figuring out checkbooks or, he had been a ceiling tile contractor for years and he couldn't really, do that measuring anymore. And, we knew something was going on, but, unfortunately what we do is we hesitate to get a diagnosis. So finally things got bad enough that we took him in and had a whole neurological workup, and they said he had vascular dementia. And they diagnosed that with an MRI and then a whole series of questions and all those types of things they do. So we were kind of relieved. We thought, they said it's not Alzheimer's. It's not a pattern like Alzheimer's. So, Alzheimer's seemed to be the most dreaded dementia at that time. Well, little did we know that he had another underlying disease called Lewy body dementia. So as time went on, he did fairly well. We had to let his office go. He was independent worker. We had to move him out of their house, which is all very traumatic, but he was doing pretty well. He's a very friendly guy, outgoing. And when my mother passed away, she had cancer. Things took a very apparent downhill turn. He couldn't make his own meals. He couldn't do his own medications. We moved him into a kind of a semi-assisted living for a while where he had his own apartment, but we paid for extra services. So he could go down and get meals. He could, get his medication administered. The nurses would keep an eye on him. But, as time went on, he got worse and he fell a couple times. And, by the time we realized how serious it was, he couldn't hardly walk. He couldn't hardly talk. And we had to place him in a nursing home. And the problem with Lewy body dementia, it's kind of like Parkinson's, where it makes a person very rigid. So he couldn't walk, eventually confined to a wheelchair. And it was very hard to be a caregiver for, our dad. He was the strong dad, the veteran, the independent businessman. And then there's 4 of us daughters to try to manage that. It was very difficult.
What would you say was one of the biggest challenges you faced initially as being a caregiver for your father?
Well, how it started one day I would meet him for lunch. My office was fairly close to where he had his little office, and he handed me his checkbook and he said, "Here, I can no longer figure this out. I can't figure this out. Will you help me?" And so I was quite taken back because he was very private about money and their finances. And so I started digging into things, and it turns out he had racked up like $8,000 of credit card debt, and he would take money out of ATM machines. I think he thought it was just his cash card. So trying to get through that and figure out, their house debt, and, trying to think about how are they going to live? What are they going to live on in the future?
Was your mom still alive at that point?
Yeah, my mom was still alive, and my mother was always very meticulous with money. She was very meticulous with record keeping, thank goodness. But he had just, he had kind of drifted in his little dementia world, and people can have signs for 20 years before we know it. And he was keeping secrets from her, and she had enough money to pay the house bills, but it was just the whole thing was, the money thing was the biggest issue other than, the whole emotional impact.
Hmm. Is that what inspired you to write your first book, Dancing with Louie, then? Is that how that came about? Or?
Yeah. So, after he passed away, I thought, first of all, Lewy body dementia isn't very well known. And I thought people need to be educated about it. And caregivers just need to know they're not alone. And also
Right.
they need to find help. You
Right.
need to go seek out resources. So it took me 6 years after he died, and I kept notes and I'd make outlines. I keep thinking, I have to write this story. And, finally one day I just thought, I'm going to do it. And I went to an Airbnb and locked myself in for 3 days. And I just started to write, and it came out and came out.
And I'm assuming, because I've spoken to other authors who have written almost like a memoir type book about a loved one that they cared for. It's almost as much therapeutic as it is anything else, because you're kind of almost releasing all of that you've had inside of you. Is that kind of how you found that for you?
And yes, it was very therapeutic. My dad had been through the years a very strong Christian, and he, was the Sunday school superintendent and all that. And as he aged, his behavior got strange. He made financial decisions that I felt were kind of unethical. And I'm like, this isn't my dad. And he had some relationships with people, so that was really hard for me. Like, here's my dad, the upstanding person in the community now, just making these poor decisions. And, I had a lot of resentment and anger. And then as, time went on and I handled his finances, he really resented that, even though he'd asked me to. So just working through the book helped me realize that this was my dad with dementia, not my regular dad who had raised me.
Right.
Yeah, it really helped me work through that.
I think one of the things that I find truly inspirational and remarkable with, writers, authors, artists who are taking their experience caring for a loved one and then turning it into a piece of work, like your book, Dancing with Louie, is that they find a way to incorporate something of their loved ones into the book. Now, I don't mean just a story, but like in your situation, you incorporated some of your dad's original writings into the book. And I know a film director that we had spoken with a while back, she had done something very similar, but her father happened to be an amazing, tremendous artist, but he became more so after his diagnosis, which is not that uncommon, where these artistic, talents just come from almost seemingly nowhere. And she did an art gallery exhibit for him, to honor his work and his creations. So you took your dad's writings. Now, I wanted to ask you about those writings. Did those writings come before the dementia diagnosis or after, or was it a little bit of both?
No, the problem was he didn't date. He had all these poems and he didn't date them. I'm sure he'd been writing them for years and he collected them. He'd write on the back of napkins. He would write on a brown paper bag.
Okay.
And, my sister, one of my sisters had collected about 48 of them and put them in a booklet. So I think some were pre-dementia. Some you can kind of tell. And this, especially one I put in the book where I'm pretty sure was after, because it just doesn't, it's not his regular rate. It doesn't make very much sense. So I think it was both, but you're right. The artist in him was definitely there, this rough and tough businessman. I really had a gentler side that really came out.
Now, I know, like us, you yourself, you're very strong in your faith. What role and how did faith play that role in this journey with your father?
Well, I think money was a big issue. He never saved for retirement because he was going to work till he died. There was no doubt about that. He was just going to work. And so my parents had Social Security. My mother had done bookwork for him for years, but they never paid into the system. She had a very minimal amount. And I would just wonder, I kept their finances and I just prayed, God, what is going to happen to them? At that point, none of us could take them in. We just didn't have a house suitable for it. And we all worked. And I felt like God was just saying to me, I'm going to take care of their finances. And, it was a real exercise in trust. And one big thing that happened, besides selling their house, we had money from the house, was that I had heard about this aid and attendance veterans pension.
Sure. Right.
for veterans that had been in during wartime, and they didn't necessarily have to be disabled because of the war. They had to meet certain criteria of being housebound. And I applied for that, and it took almost a year. It took about 10 months, but he ended up getting $1,600 a month extra. And I just felt like, just by the grace of God, I heard about that. He qualified for it. And, they always had decent places to live. They had food, they were comfortable. He didn't have to go on Medicaid till it was about 6 months before he died.
Okay. I know, one thing, and you just mentioned it, that, we find very common, unfortunately, is that, families who are going situations like you are with your father, and probably to an extent with your mother when she became ill, they're not made aware of a lot of these resources that are available to them. They just, hopefully, by chance, they discover it on their own by accident almost. And, I've spoken to many doctors, heads of medical schools, and, family caregivers. And that's one common thing. We're not doing enough to equip these families when they're going through this really day in and day out situation, caring for a family member. And, it really takes a toll on a person. And I think it's also just a disservice that they're not being equipped with the information that could be so helpful and supportive to them. And I can't find anybody that has a good explanation as to why they're not given that information. We just recently spoke to somebody who was a registered nurse, and she's a big advocate for the dementia and Alzheimer's community. And she said, when I'm in the hospital and I'm helping with discharge, the least I can do is give them the phone number to the Alzheimer's Association or their local area on aging, or help them with the resources that can at least help get them started and off on the right foot once they return home with this family member. Because as you probably are aware, once you're discharged from the hospital, you're left to fend for yourself. I mean, there's very little follow-up, if any, and now you're left with figuring out, what do we do next? Where do I turn to? And it's such an overwhelming experience for families. And, it just makes their caregiving that much more difficult than what it really needs to be. And, that's something we try to advocate for here at All Home Care Matters is, having people on like yourself and other professionals and people that have been through the situation or they're in the field, to just hopefully the right families and the right individuals will get that information. So it just makes their caregiving journey a little bit easier. It's not going to solve it. It's not going to cure it. But if we can just help, like with your book, Dancing with Louie, if it can just help one person, that one person is going to make such a profound impact and difference in their journey. And, that's what it should all be about, right? Now, I know you recently had completed a workshop at your church, and I think it's a tremendous workshop that you did. And you said it's exploring the ways of developing sensitivity and support for caregivers, fulfilling the scripture of bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And that's Galatians 6:2. I think, we're strong in our faith, you're strong in your faith. And for those that may or may not have a faith, I'm not judging them, but I do feel like, there's so much profound help and wisdom that can be found in scriptures when you're going through, whether it's a caregiving journey or a different life tribulation, that can just maybe be that extra inspiration or a sense of security that, so many people are looking for at different points of their lives. But I think especially during caregiving, we're famous in the United States for having the sandwich generation, where, and for those that may not be familiar with it, sandwich generation is just like it sounds. You're in the middle of a sandwich. A lot of parents are helping to still raise their children, even up through their early 20s. And then they have their elderly parents who now, because of modern medicine and healthcare, are living longer. Now you're left with helping to care for them too. And you're kind of stuck in the middle. And that can play a tremendous role in your mental health, your physical health, your emotional well-being. How did your role in your mental health and emotional health and physical health, how did that role fit into when you were left helping to care for your father?
We still had one teenage son at home when my parents were going through that. And he was very active in Boy Scouts and school plays and that. And I worked full time and I traveled some for work and my husband was working. So it was very stressful. We, plan around our son's activities and take my parents' dinner. And they got to a point after my mother died where I was just very depressed. I mean, I would cry at the drop of a hat, which isn't normally me. I'm usually pretty, kind of they say is in the Midwest here, well, that's the way it goes, if this happens, that happens. But I would start crying at the drop of a hat. And I remember one day at work, my computer wouldn't boot up and I just stood there and tears got in my eye. And one of my coworkers walked in, he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm okay." But I knew I wasn't, and I knew I had to do something. So I did visit my doctor and got some antidepressants. And, at one point, my mom and I went to I think it was an Alzheimer's Association community group, just to see how other people were handling this.
Right.
So that's really messaged me, there's nothing wrong with seeking help. There's nothing wrong with talking to a therapist or speaking with your doctor. A rundown, depressed, sickly you is not going to help your loved ones. And, if you're taking care of parents, they probably will pass away before you. And you've got to maintain your mental health, your physical health, your spiritual health. You can't ignore, your church family and God while you're going through this.
Now, you mentioned something that you and your mother both went to an Alzheimer's Association, meeting. How did this affect your mother? Like what was her role in helping to care for your dad? And because I know you said she had also been diagnosed with cancer. So I imagine, at some point, depending on when the diagnosis was, she was dealing with her own health issues as well.
And she had other health issues too. She had osteoporosis, which is kind of a bone crumbling disease.
Right.
So her spine was bad and she had other issues. But she was mentally there and, he was kind of physically there. So they kind of took care of each other there. He would get their coffee in the morning because she had blood pressure medicine and she was tired, but, she would sort their pills and figure those things out. But, she would, looking back, she'd say to me things, she goes, "You just don't know what goes on around here." And I kind of blew it off like, I don't know what's going on, in your marriage, but, looking back, Lewy body disease, it causes, restless sleeping, hallucinations. I'm sure he had some of that. So I just thought, if we can go to a group a few times and she can see other people in her situation. My mother's very introverted, so she didn't talk much, but, I could see, oh yeah, that lady, is really frustrated like I am. So, it really helped both of us just to see how other people are coping with things like dementia.
Now, you said, Nancy, that there were 4 of you. You had 3 other sisters?
I have 3 sisters.
Were they local?
2 of them were local, 1 lived out of state.
How did it come to be that it seems that the role of the primary caregiver fell to you as your responsibility?
So I'm really the 3rd daughter out of 4, but there is a pretty large age span between us. There's 17 years between my oldest sister and youngest. So my 2 oldest sisters actually moved out of state for quite a while. And even though one moved back, I had already fallen the role kind of taking care of, my mother more with some of her health issues. And
sure,
I'm a very administrative, organized person. So I really did a lot of the, administrative work, taking care of their finances, organizing medical records. A couple of my other sisters, very compassionate, sweet people. I mean, my oldest sister would just be there, taking care of their physical needs. My youngest sister would be there bringing soup and, that type of thing. So we all had our role. Okay. I think I was just more out front because I was trying to organize all these different caregiving needs.
You were kind of managing the process.
I was managing the process. Yeah, that's what I do best. I coordinate the process.
Well, and that's what we usually find is it's either the oldest or the youngest is kind of leading it. And then hopefully there's no conflict or, situations. And again, it helps when people live locally, obviously, but it's usually either the oldest or the youngest, and then the others are kind of delegated to, but it's always nice when it's not just you having the full responsibility, because that makes a difference also. How did you manage to keep your parents in home for as long as you had?
we had them in their house till things just got out of control. It was too expensive to keep them there. There was a very bad storm one summer, and they lost their electricity for a whole week, and everybody else had their electricity back in about 3 days. So we had moved my mother in with us, and we found out some breaker box in the back was bad. And as we're walking around, we see the windows are rotted, and
Okay.
hot water in the bathroom, sink hadn't worked for who knows how long. And, the house just needed a lot of maintenance. So we moved them, and then plus the stairs, and my mother, it wasn't safe for her to keep going downstairs and doing laundry in that. So we found a 1-level townhouse for them, and they lived there for a couple of years and did very well there, even though my dad didn't like it because he said he was stuck out in the brush, and whatever that meant. So, and then when my mom died, in retrospect, I wish we would have tried harder to leave him in that townhouse, but we did move him into the apartment where he did have some services and that, until he just absolutely could not be cared for there.
Sure. Did you ever hire any outside professional help to be with them, like at night or during the day?
We didn't. And looking back, I wish I had been more aware of that type of thing. Mm-hmm. We did have a housekeeper come in, which was actually a friend of mine. And we had meals delivered off and on. And when my dad moved into the assisted living, they did have nursing care there, so they would come check on him and that. Knowing more, I know now, maybe we could have had more services come into him in the townhouse and he could have stayed there. Sure. But, you kind of make the best decisions you know how to make.
With the information you have. And I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier. So many families aren't aware of the various services and options or resources that are available to them. What would you say is the best aspects of caregiving? Because, I try to be careful because it can be exhausting, it can be draining, it can lead to burnout. And, there are those real aspects of caring for your family member or your loved one, but there's also some of the most rewarding experiences that you wouldn't have otherwise. And so I like to, really focus on those things, because I don't want people to be scared if, they're listening or watching this and 6 months from now, mom or dad need their help and they're like, oh my gosh, I remember what she went through. It's not all doom and gloom. It's not all doom and gloom. So what are some of the positive aspects of caregiving for a family member or a loved one?
I was really able to spend more time with my parents than I had, while we were raising kids and running around at work. You get together for birthdays or different things. But when they needed more care, I just naturally spent more time with them. And when my dad got to the point he couldn't drive, I would give him rides to his office. It was near where I worked. And, he'd tell me stories from his childhood, and, we'd laugh at some old family jokes. It was just kind of precious that, he could still communicate and still talk, and he loved to tell stories. And, just spending more time with my mom, hearing about some of the days when she was growing up. Even when she was sick, you always become a little more introspective, I think, when you are looking at death. And I spent one night in the hospital with her before she died. It was just she and I, and it was really special, and I learned to appreciate my parents. I learned grace. I think really one thing you learn when you are helping elderly people to be a little more tolerant. If the guy next to you is driving slow and you can see he's older, or the lady at the grocery store is just, putzing along trying to find her special soup. I mean, to try to help people and be more tolerant and not always be in a rush.
Right.
And it's like that with people with disabilities too. If you spend time with people with disabilities, you learn compassion, and goodness knows we need more of that in this world.
That's right. Absolutely. Now, when people have cared for a father, a mother, and even in some cases spouses, it seems they've always discovered something about their loved one that they probably otherwise wouldn't have known had they not been that loved one's caregiver. Was there anything you discovered about your father that you're like, wow, Mom, I never knew this about Dad? Or, and I'll give you an example of what I mean. So I knew of a woman who had late stage dementia. She'd been married to the same man for 60 plus years. And once the dementia had really set in and it was the middle to late stages, she became fixated on this boy that she had a crush on when she was a young teenage girl. And she just would go on and on and on about this boy. And the family said, we've never heard mom talk about this boy. You know, dad was the love of her life. They'd been married for 60 years. They got married when she was 18, you know, and it wasn't that she loved that boy, you know, separately from her husband, but she just had this memory that would not leave her, and she just became fixated on it. So I don't think the family would have known about that had their mother had not moved in and had lived with him until her passing. And so do you have any story like that about your dad? Not necessarily a crush or somebody like that, but just something that you discovered about your dad that you were like, wow, I had no idea, you know?
I don't know if there's any revelations like that, but I just, as he got older, and after my mom passed, you know, he just really talked about, you know, how he really loved her, and, you know, he was sorry if he caused her any grief. You know, he was very much a workaholic, and he was gone a lot, and he moved out of town a lot. And, you know, and he said, I just pray to God that, you know, she forgives me for, you know, being gone so much. And, you know, I could just really, again, see kind of the heart of God awakened in him again. So even with dementia and some of his previous, you know, escapades, I could see the dad coming through that had the heart for Jesus, and that really, and he loved his family so much. I mean, he loved his daughters. I have one picture he had taken with those 4 girls, and it's not a very good picture of us, but we were standing in a restaurant with him, and he called it my 4 treasures.
Oh, nice.
It just reminded me that he was gone a lot when I was a kid, again, working, and, you know, I'm like, why isn't dad ever home? But, you know, it just reminded me again that that was always his heart.
Now, how long did your second book come after your first book of Dancing with Louie? Because Dancing with Louie was about your journey with your father, and then Remarkable Caregiving, the care of family and friends. That's actually a collection of several caregivers that you interviewed, correct?
Yeah. Well, I published Dancing with Louie. It came out during COVID in 2020. Okay. Just let me give you a hint. Don't publish a book during a pandemic because you have no way of going out talking about it. I thought, well, this, you know, I learned a lot from this, and I had, you know, my caregiving story. I thought there's other people with caregiving stories that we should share. It kind of gave me something to do during COVID. I was working from home, but, you know, kind of stuck here. So then I started writing a second book, and I interviewed people. I really was only able to interview one of the people in the story in person. We sat out in her garage and talked to. The rest were over video. And, you know, it didn't, first of all, it's a lot easier to write stories about other people than yourself, because, you know, first of all, they're anonymous. So, and I had to read and have permission from them of everything I talked about. So it didn't take me very long to get that one out. It came out, I had copies in the middle of last year, 2021, but it came out in bookstores in November of last year. So it was only about a year later.
Okay. Have you received any responses to either Dancing with Louie or Remarkable Caregiving that have stood out in your mind, or that you want to share? Anything inspirational or how it helps somebody?
I've received some reviews. It's always great to get reviews on Amazon and that, but they're hard to come by. But just people who told me they've read the book and they're just like, I mean, I feel validated. You know, they say they feel like they're not alone caregiving, or maybe they experience depression, or maybe they experience anger. I mean, we experience all sorts of different emotions when we're caregiving. And, you know, so I've had several people tell me that they're touched. And in both books, I offer resources for people. And I mean, that's really my hope too, that they'll find, like, there's a checklist for home care in Remarkable Caregiving. You know, if you're considering taking someone in your home, what should you ask yourself? How should you talk to your family? And that was really put together by one starting the book by a family who kept her dad for 4 years with Parkinson's. You know, so she really brainstormed and helped me put that list together. So just, you know, yeah, I've got a lot of encouragement. You know, Remarkable Caregiving is just barely out. So,
okay. Well, we're going to, you know, that's going to follow up with what I was going to say next. We're going to have a link to your website, which is nancypoland.com, as well as your email address and all of the social media links so people can find you. But I also wanted to mention and let you kind of share this with everyone is that you also have a newsletter, and they can sign up for that.
Yep, it's nancyrpoland.com because there's other Nancy Polands.
Yes, nancyrpoland.com. We'll have the link up on the site, but your newsletter, why don't you share with our listeners and viewers what exactly the newsletter entails and what it is and why they should sign up for it?
Well, every month I generate a newsletter, and it's just my newsletter doesn't have extra advertising things in it like you get sometimes when you click on different social media things. And I pick a general topic each month. I might talk, last time I talked about the 2 F's, which was fraud and falls. And, I give links to resources, and I talk about, preventing falling is like a huge
Right.
part of caregiving for elderly persons, or any of us. I mean, I've fallen myself, even when I wasn't so elderly. Sometimes I'll talk about dementia. Sometimes I'll talk about children, resources for parents who are caring for children with disabilities. So I pick a different topic every month, and I'll put together some writings and some links, and I'll try to list some special resources. Like I could list, this podcast, I might do that, or maybe somebody tells me about a good book or a good website. And just, a little personal note usually. It's not super long. People can read it on their phones if they want. And just to give people encouragement. And, one of my big missions is to provide resources for people like we talked about in the beginning. Do they know about the veterans resources? Do they know about, some of the aging, different counties, states have, aging information. So I just try to help people find resources.
Speaking about the aid and attendance again, when your mom became ill, did you apply and also receive it for her?
No, I didn't, because you really had to be, there's pretty strict rules. You have to be homebound, and
Okay, so she wasn't at that point.
he wasn't really, yeah. Now, had he passed away first, I think we probably would have, but
Okay.
yeah, but that is a good point, that
Spouses are also qualified. Yeah.
and I have such a heart for veterans. Whenever I'm at book fairs and I see somebody with their veterans hat on, I just say, hey, are you using all your veterans resources? I mentioned that, I mentioned that they can get medications for either free or low price. My brother-in-law is a veteran. He got free hearing aids from a service disability. So I just really have a heart for veterans.
Absolutely. They deserve all of our appreciation, no question. I know several of my family members are veterans and, war veterans through Vietnam, and, the appreciation that should be shown to them regularly. I say every day's Veterans Day, right? It's remarkable, the sacrifices. And I think it's one of those things, almost, I'm not equating the two as equals, but we run several caregiver support groups, and, we've had people come in who, a friend or, a relative, oh, you're exaggerating, it's not that bad, but they're not the ones doing it, right? And, I kind of equate that to the veterans. Unless you've gone through the service, you can't really understand the sacrifice. It gets almost too cliche, like, thank you for your service. When we say it, I want to really thank you for your service, because you went so that someone else didn't have to. And, what you gave up in order to serve the country should be commended on a regular basis. So
veteran benefits are hard. When I applied for that for my dad, it took months. Now, I don't know if it's better nowadays. That was a dozen years ago, but I would call them. I would send in address changes. I would tell them, yes, the form is there. I can talk to you.
And I know when we talk to families on our professional side, we serve families, and, the process is still very long. It's still a long, tedious process, and it can be very complicated, especially if you have an elderly couple trying to do it on their own. They don't have someone like you or one of their children. It can be very, very difficult, and it's a very rigid process. It's there for them. They're entitled to it if they qualify, but getting through that process is a different situation, and it can be very overwhelming. So I like to ask people who are in this industry or an expert or who have gone through it like yourself, Nancy, and who's become an authority as a result of it, if someone emailed you or called you tomorrow and said, Nancy, I just got to take care of my dad. This is what's going on, but I don't know what to do. What would be your first piece of advice? What's the number one thing before anything else that you would recommend that they do?
First thing I would say is if your parents or your dad or whoever you're with has their faculties about them, get their legal paperwork in order.
Yes.
Go get power of attorney, get healthcare power of attorney, and get a will done. In Remarkable Caregiving, the first story is about a family. The dad had a healthcare director for himself, but not for the mom. Well, he died first, and they were out of state, and the daughter had to go 2 states away to get guardianship appointed for her mom. So she had to go to court. She then had to report every cent spent to the court. She couldn't take her mom out of state. She wasn't supposed to anyway, without permission, which I'm sure costs thousands of dollars. So I would say if they can still do it, it's not too late, get that paperwork in place.
And I think you're right on money with getting the legal stuff in place, because that avoids so much difficulties and issues down the road when, even though you may not need it now, at some point you're going to. And, having those things in line, having them in order. But I think also almost as importantly is knowing what your loved one's wishes are. What do they want to have done? And I think that should be up to them when it's at all possible. I know recently we had the president of Aging with Dignity on the show, and they are the organization, nonprofit, who created and are responsible for the 5 wishes. And that's one of the number one things that families encounter, because, nowadays we don't all necessarily live locally in our communities that we were born and raised in and, grow up a couple miles from mom and dad. Families are scattered. And trying to do that, like you mentioned your story in the book, when you're several states away or even several hours away, it's just, you're causing yourself undue pressure, undue stress that could be avoided. But the flip side to that, and I don't know if you've encountered this, is sometimes our seniors and our elderly, they're of a generation that was very prideful, very strong-minded, very independent. And I say that all in a positive way. And then you go and approach them and say, Mom, Dad, we need to get this done. Sometimes they're not as receptive because, well, we'll take care of it when it's time, But the problem is none of us know when that time might be. And so I think if you're able to have that conversation with your loved ones, even if it's yourself, talk with your spouse or, your significant other, and make sure people know what your wishes are, and then get them documented and get them authorized so that down the road, if something should happen, it also, you're doing a favor for your family, because now they're not in a situation where if there's multiple siblings and they don't all agree, but nobody knows exactly what mom or dad wanted, it causes undue conflict as well. So I think having those wishes expressed, having the legal documentation in order, that would have been my answer also. That should be the number one thing that you want to have in place. And then everything else kind of falls in line afterwards.
When as you work through a healthcare directive, there are a lot. My husband and I just updated ours. There's lots of questions. And, you think end of life is, am I going to pull the plug or not? No. Right. End of life is, are we going to give hydration? Are we going to give antibiotics? Are we going to put a food tube in? Are we going to, get x-rays if they have pneumonia? It's not just easy answers. And if you can get some feel for how, the person wants no measures.
Right.
Or maybe the person wants, comfort care. And I guess none of us know what we think when we're staring death in the face, but at least if you can have that crucial conversation with your loved one, and sort those things out. It's going to give you peace of mind at the end when you have to make some of those hard decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nancy, what would be your last words of wisdom for those watching and listening to your interview today?
I would say be prepared. I was a Boy Scout mom, and that was kind of the theme, be prepared. But, there's a new sandwich generation, people in their 40s and 50s. It used to be my generation. Now my parents are gone. My husband's parents are gone. Our kids are going to have to start worrying about, what's going to happen to us as we age.
Right.
Have some of those crucial conversations. Help your parents find your paperwork. I have a checklist on my website that you can get for free and sign up for my newsletter, an important document checklist. Do you know where, your parents' health insurance is at? Do you know where their legal papers are? Maybe they're divorced. Do you know where that paperwork is? And even for yourself, I said, if my husband and I were in a car accident together, could our kids find, our things? I filled it out for us. So, just be prepared. Think ahead, help fix up their house so it's safe, put bathtub safety bars in or high toilet seats. Just try to think ahead about what could happen. You don't have to be gloom and doom, but just, approach it as a partnership.
Absolutely. And I know, just to, expand on that, when we were talking with Joanne Eason from Aging with Dignity and Five Wishes, one of the cities, and I want to say, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was in Pennsylvania, one of the cities, the whole area, their healthcare system started this initiative on their own where they designated the freezer to put all of your legal documents. So if a fire department, ambulance, or a family member went into that home, they would automatically know this is where all of those documents are located. They put them in a Ziploc bag or whatever. But that way they're all in one concise place. But you need to tell people, if you get an advance directive or your living will done, make sure your doctor knows and make sure your children and your spouse know where it's at. Because it's one thing to do it, but then it's another thing to find it.
Yeah. Yeah, I put all mine into a PDF file and I sent it off to them. And I said, keep it handy.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and I told them where it is in our box, too, our lockbox. So.
And one thing I do want to mention, you just recently were accepted as part of the AlzhAuthors organization, which is a tremendous resource for families and caregivers. It's the largest that I'm aware of resource of, blogs, podcasts, caregiver tips, but their big thing is authoring books on dementia like yourself. It is all independent authors who have written books on the subject that provide value, resource, and support to families who are going through this. And you can probably expand on this a little bit if you wish, but the books aren't just automatically accepted. They go through a rigorous vetting process, so they're very protective of the community of families going through dementia. And so, I'm very happy for you, and I know you're probably very honored to be accepted or admitted into AlzhAuthors. We just recently had the co-founder on, and we have been big proponents and supporters of AlzhAuthors for close to over 10 years, before there was ever a podcast of All Home Care Matters. And their website, their organization is just tremendous. And I don't know if you want to speak on that before you go.
I was just accepted. Yes, I had to send them my book and some information, and I had heard about a month ago they accepted me. I haven't done the podcast yet, so I think that is to follow, and my official date is April 20th.
Okay.
But they already announced it on social media, so that's kind of exciting.
Yes, yeah.
So, yeah, I feel very honored they would choose me. It's like,
they are the Ivy League of dementia resources.
They are, yeah.
And every person there has gone through it. They're a professional, or they have been touched by dementia in some way, and they are doing such tremendous work like yourself. I mean, you're an obvious perfect fit for the organization, and I just appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. We're going to have all of your links and information in the show notes as well as on our website, and we look forward to maybe your third book down the road, Nancy.
Maybe. I know it's in my head. It just hasn't come out yet. So,
well, here, break some news for us. What are you thinking of the third book being about?
What I want to, and I have to study it first, but I want to talk about faith communities and how they can support caregivers.
Yes.
I have some ideas in my head. When I wrote Remarkable Caregiving, I called it The Care of Family and Friends, and thinking, well, maybe someday I could write Remarkable Caregiving, I might call it Faith Communities Stepping Up, where I thought it would be interesting to write one on immigrants, but that's always down the line. But
And I personally believe at the core of nursing, medicine, caregiving, I think at the core of that is faith. I really do. I know Jim Toohey, who is the founder of Aging with Dignity and Five Wishes, he actually had just written a book about his journey working side by side with Mother Teresa. And the book is it's a new release. It's not out yet. And people, if they're interested, they can get the link on our website. But he talks about how that experience working side by side with Mother Teresa just totally transformed his life, and it led to Aging with Dignity and just their whole, mission and focus on, helping people with, advanced care planning. And it's just remarkable the work that the faith community has played and does play in the caregiving and healthcare sector. I think it's to be commended, and I would love for you to write that book because I think it's an important topic that needs to be shared.
Yeah, and I've talked to a couple of faith communities around me lately. Like our church is rather small, about 250 people. I talked to a local Catholic church, 10,000 people. So it's one thing to manage caregiving with a couple hundred people. It's another to manage caregiving with a parish of 10,000 people. It's. I mean, how do you do that?
Right.
So. How do you find out people even have needs? How do you get people to accept help? So it's a broad topic, and like I said, I definitely need to research it. And it, couldn't be any faith community.
Well, and you might be going into a whole series too.
I might. Who knows? Yeah. Well, as my husband say, I better sell some more of my books before I write another one. So.
Well, Nancy, it has been a great pleasure and honor to have you on with us today. I appreciate your time, and we look forward to learning more about Dancing with Louie and Remarkable Caregiving. We'll have all of your information in our show notes and on the website, and hopefully we'll see you back here at All Home Care Matters in the future.
Thank you, Lance. I very much appreciate what you do and how you're working with our community.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to please visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to All Home Care Matters on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms and watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We would also again like to thank Nancy Poland for taking time to visit with us today. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.